Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to be teaching you how to build a basic helicopter. Now this video will be broken into two parts. The first part is how to make a helicopter such as the one you're seeing here. Be stable, fly, take off, everything like that. It is a beginner level video, but I do expect you to know how to make an engine work, how to plug in microcontrollers and nodes and stuff like that. The second video, we're going to actually go into altitude hold functions and some other stability things, but by the end of this first video you should be able to make a helicopter that can fly and do all the stuff that I'm doing right now pretty stably. Now I'm not talking about visuals. You're gonna do something to make your own helicopter look the way you want it to look. I'm just talking about functionality, how to make it work, how to program the thing up to get it going. This video assumes that you have a basic understanding and knowledge about how Stormworks works, specifically when it comes to the building and all that stuff. Now, this is up to you really to make the helicopter however you want. You know, I'd recommend putting some skids and whatnot, but again, this is fully 100% design up to you. But what you're gonna have to have no matter what is a tail rotor and a main rotor. So as we mentioned in the beginning of the video, those are really the two elements that you need in addition to the other parts of the helicopter. So we'll start off with a compact pilot seat. You could use whatever seat you want, but we're not going for styling points here. We're going for functionality, and this will allow us to put an engine behind us. So you see how we have these two arms, and of course you're more than welcome to close this off and put windows and all that stuff. That's really up to you, but I'm going to keep it kind of exposed so we can go through the various parts. Now if you type in rotor, you're going to see a wide range of various rotors and sizes and things. Now that really depends on the sized helicopter you're putting. So for example, this little thing probably doesn't need a rotor that big. I'm sure it will work, but you do have to be careful, because if you make it too big like that, you're going to cause some instability. Now this would work a little smaller, granted, but you could see here it says helicopter rotor. So you just have to be careful that you have rotors, not propellers, meaning they're ones that have the roll, pitch, and collective. If we type in propeller, then you can get all kinds of stuff, including an aircraft propeller, which only has a collective. So you can't use that. You have to use one that is for a helicopter. Now there's only one tail rotor. So you could type in tail, you only see one thing. And this is what has to go back here. Now we're going to talk about the actual implications of positioning this thing incorrectly and what happens if you do. So we're just going to put it in any arbitrary direction, and we're going to run through diagnosis as we build. So I'm not going, or diagnostics, I'm not going to get into crazy things. So you have that there, and then we'll want our main rotor. Now again, we have a variety of different ones. Something like this looks okay. You just have to be careful that these two don't clash with each other. Now the hitbox and this hitbox doesn't clash, so maybe it wouldn't, but you also can adjust the size of this, and that for sure would probably clear it. Now you'll want to focus your propeller here, or rotor here, more or less on the center of the weight of the helicopter. If you put it too far forward, it'll be unstable. Too far back, it'll be unstable. You want it to kind of hover over the main mass of that helicopter body. And those are the two things that make a helicopter. Now, that's not all, obviously. We have to have an engine. Like I said, we're just going to be using a small pre-built engine. I recommend you watch my tutorial if you're not familiar with how to make this engine work. We're not going to go into the depths of that, but in essence, we have our coolants. So we're just going to put a radiator here in the back, just like that. And again, you can get as fancy as you want. I mean, you're not limited or restricted by what I'm doing here. Okay, we have our exhaust, fuel, and air. So we're just going to put a small air filter at the top there. For the exhaust, that is, again, up to us, but just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to push it up here and put an actual exhaust like that. And then we need fuel. Now, the fuel tank, I'd suggest using at least a medium one, or if you have the space to build your own custom fuel tank, just because it'll get you a wider, much longer range. Now you can see we could do this, but it kind of clashes with that. What you have to have is a refueling port and a vent for your pressure. So what I do is I like to put this piece, and what we'll do on the exterior is have a hose port just like this, and then on the other side here type in gas relief valve, and then just a simple fluid port end like that. Once that's ready, above we're going to put our fuel tank. Nope, not that, just tank. Not fuel, but just regular tank. There we go. You'll want it to be as close to the center of the creation as possible for the weight. And here we've actually stacked 3 of them, so that should be a decent amount of fuel for this helicopter. Now, out of the engine, we have our RPS. And what you will want to do is obviously have some sort of generators to create power out of this situation, and even possibly having a motor if you want, just to end up giving it a boost instead of the old starter motor. But you could see now what we can do is, in essence, connect them. So this one here can go up to there, and then what we'll do is we'll put a pipe piece. Now keep in mind, before people start cringing, we're gonna have to do gearing. We're just not gonna do it yet. I'm gonna define our path first, and then we're gonna add gears, just so it's very clear what we've done. So I'm just gonna put one that passes through like that. And again, you do your own styling thing. We're not gonna really worry about that here. It's almost like a shell, a frame, what I'm working with here. Anyways, now we've split up our engine into 2 paths. One gets diverged to the tail rotor, one goes up here to the main rotor. Now you can see there's actually an RPS on top, so you can stack these on top of one another and have sort of a, I forgot what it's called, coaxial rotor aircraft, I believe. So you can do that. Not all rotors can do that. You could see this one is a rotor small, and it actually has, it says, well, it does, whether it says or not, you could see this one is called a rotor end. Whereas this one's just called a regular rotor. This one has a pass through, so we don't have to use that one. We can find one that has sort of an ending point if you want that. Of course, like I said, there's a variety of different, including really big ones that are used for tilt rotors for VTOLs. Again, this one's probably just the most suited for how I want this to look. As I said, that one's too large. This one can work. I've actually done this on certain helicopters. People complained and said it looks silly or funny or whatever, but I don't mind it. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that yes, you can use these on aircraft. The difference is that you'll set your positive blade and it's pretty much going to put out collective. I mean, you could also do neutral and increase the collective, because the only difference between a airplane propeller, if I can find it here, aircraft propeller, you can see it has collective, but then it doesn't have the other nodes. And it's, so you could see here, you have either positive or neutral, and you could adjust the blades. So it's identical, in fact, to this. You just get less nodes. But we're talking about helicopters. You can't use an aircraft here, but yes, you could use the helicopter ones on an aircraft. That's how you could make tilt rotors and VTOLs fly with these types of rotors. They're just, the physics are identical. Anyway, back to this. Alright, so we have our basic helicopter. I'm aware we didn't connect this at the end. And this is where we're going to have to talk about positioning the arrows in a certain way. Because right now we just kind of arbitrarily place them, as I'm imagining many of you are going to arbitrarily place these and potentially get it wrong. That's also why I'm covering it, because if I tell you, okay, put it like this, and you miss that step, then you'll come back and say that it's not working properly. So we're going to diagnose it. Now for the engine, you could have a fancy microcontroller, as I talked about in my engine video, how to make your own engine and stuff. But the neat thing about a helicopter is you don't actually need all that, because once it's going, it's just going. It doesn't need to be adjusted or changed. Obviously, parameters dictate things, and you may want to have it set to a certain RPS. I understand that. But as far as basics are concerned, you don't need to. So we're obviously going to have to put a battery just to give us power for the starter motor and stuff. And then I'm just going to go ahead and connect everything to the battery. I always recommend branching out from the battery, or better yet, to put a relay, or not a relay, a breaker. That's my absolute favorite way of doing things, because if you have a breaker and especially a cable anchor, then you can charge it up as needed. And rather than what I just did here, you connect battery to A. I always do it that way. A is my hot, and then B is my cold. Actually, this would also go to the hot, and then this goes to everything else. So that way we can cut off our engine if we want, but we're just going to turn this on and have it kind of working once I spawn it. Now, what I was saying about the engine is you don't have to have a complex controller, because what you can do is, for example, hotkey 1 can go to the starter. Just have to make sure it's going to be push starter, and then 2 and 3 are your throttle up and throttle down. So throttle down, and number 3 throttle up. Now make sure these are push, and what I would do then is put a lever like that. That lever is going to go to the throttle of the engine, and then your 2 is down, your 3 is up, and make sure this thing's also plugged into the electricity. Now you may want to have the fan here kick on when the throttle is a certain when the throttle goes up. So for that, I'd recommend using a threshold gate, and we're just going to kind of store our microcontrollers anywhere. You obviously can reposition them as you want. We'll just kind of throw them on the bottom for now. So the threshold gate, which activates the fan, will come from the throttle lever, and we'll say once we're at a low of like 0.3 all the way to 1, or in fact 999, whatever, then we want our fan to turn on. So right now we've connected the engine, and this should be enough to make the engine start up, but none of these controls are going to give us power over how to make a helicopter work, the yaw, the rotors and stuff like that. And there are different ways of doing that, but what I use is a gyroscope. Now, people have made their own gyroscopes, as you can see here. There's all kinds of other ones, but really what you'll want, or what I want to do, is show you how to use this one. So what I always do is I kind of place it on the underside of my aircraft, just for kind of easy reference. Most of the time it's underside. Sometimes I hide it a little bit better, but it's positioned here. And if you go here, you could take a look at how it works. So it actually has a series of things coming into it and a series of things coming out of it. Now you have this auto hover function, which honestly I recommend always having on. It says when auto hover is enabled, it'll attempt to keep your helicopter steady. I found without that, it'll just start to go all over the place. So first thing we're going to do is that threshold gate that we put on the radiator fan, we're also going to have it turn on the gyro. Now, be careful. You can have it always on. You could put a constant on here, but what's going to happen is your battery's going to drain because this thing has to be plugged in to the electricity. Now, yes, you can put a relay, you can put a button, a key, whatever you want. This is just how we're doing it in this video. We're just going to use that threshold gate. Now, over here, you can see a series of different things coming in and coming out. And if you press select, it actually has a number of parameters that you could set here. So we're going to go through that later. But the first thing that we're going to want to do is go to our various rotors and select what we need to be coming out of them. So for example, stabilized yaw goes to our yaw. Here we have pitch. Well, that's going to go to our stabilized pitch. Up down is our collective, and lastly roll goes to stabilized roll. So that's quite simple. You just literally connect it. Now in your seat, that's where you have to decide what you want to put where. And the general way that I do it is to put roll first, WS is pitch, left right is yaw, and up down is literally up down. So that will control those things. Now you could leave the reset at 10%, that should be okay. And now however we label these things, that's what you're gonna attach. So AD is roll. So we find the roll and we go to AD. If we go back here, you could see WS is pitch. So we go to pitch and set that to WS and vice versa. So up down is up down. That leaves the yaw for the left and right. So we can sit inside, hold 1 and press 3. Oh, and look at that. All right, well, it got off the ground. Now we're kind of flying with one rotor, but it worked at a very, very, very basic level. So if you get that happening, mistake number 1, you have to set your rotor to neutral. If you don't set your rotor to neutral, it will be constantly pushing upward, in essence. Whatever like is up, imagine it's mounted on a plane, constant forward motion, or in this case upward motion. No, we want to set it to neutral and then be able to set it ourselves. So that's number 1. I mean, you can play with your blade count, your size, that's purely up to you. You will notice different blade sizes and different blade counts do change how it performs. So anyway, that is one thing. Now over here, again, we're going to have it neutral. You can also set it to positive, but we don't want that. So we want both of them just to be neutral. I can leave the rotors with 2 blades. That doesn't matter. So that, in essence, you saw that it shot right up off the ground. We'll try again. So now, if I press up, we got up. If I press down, we're going down. It is moving a little bit, but what I can do is if I hold D, it tilts right, hold A, it tilts left, and I can spin with the arrow keys around. I'm pressing left, spinning left, pressing right, yawing, I guess, is the proper definition. So we got it working. The thing now works as a very basic level. It is able to fly. We're holding W, it pitches forward, up, down, it gets going. Now, 2 things right away is, while yes, it is flying, it is quite unstable, and it kind of wants to fight you. Now, what we're going to do is jump back into the workbench here. I recommend, first of all, having some extra weight. But before I do that, let's just stop and do a small review. So it works. You could stop watching this video here and give yourself a semi-functional, semi-stable helicopter without much effort. You could see it's not too difficult to make the thing take off and fly. What's difficult is fine-tuning it, getting it up to that level where it's actually stable. But all that aside, yes, you have a working helicopter now. Anyway, like I said, what I tend to do is put a little bit of weight first, just because some extra weight will help it be a little bit more stable. The game really doesn't work well with things that are light. It's just not really tuned in or well defined for things that are just like paperweight. So I would add some weight. Now I did put weight here in the front, so that will possibly mess up some of that weight balancing that I talked about here, where we kind of put our rotor dead center, but I think this will work still. So one thing that I didn't really stop and focus on is the position and orientation of your rotors. This is correct. So if you have it like this, with this facing forward, the negative left and back, positive front and right, it'll work properly. If you have it in a different orientation, you may find that when you pitch forward, it actually pitches back and stuff like that. And likewise for this tail rotor, if you set it in another direction, meaning if the negative was to the left and positive to the right, when I press left arrow key, it would actually go to the right. So this is the right orientation. You adjust them so the controls make sense. If they're backwards by any means, then you gotta flip them around. So we added the weight. I just kind of added a very basic cockpit. I know we said we're not going to really focus on styling, but there we have it. And now we get to the gearing. So you saw how the helicopter was really kind of happy to take off. It was almost too light and just jumping around. So for that, what I recommend first and foremost is putting a dial. And again, you can use composites, you can use displays, you can use a lot of different things. We're just going basic and old school here. What we want to do is get our RPS. Now that RPS has to be in a happy place to give us a stable flight. So I'm going to fire it up again. And you can see it's redlining. So right now that engine is redlining. And that's kind of what's bringing this to happen. Now I've added the weight and you can see now it's not taking off anymore. So there's two things now. We need to put that gearing, and we have to talk about when you've kind of reached your max capacity for what you're trying to do. So with the previous iteration, it was flying around quite happily, and now it's struggling. So let's start with putting a gear. Now you could see how these kind of were here, meaning I could put two gears in each direction like this, or I can open it up like that, put a gear. Let's make it facing into the engine. And then what we'll want is to put a T-piece to split up the route from this and to our tail rotor. So I'm not going into specifics, do this, do that, because every helicopter is different. You may have to fine tune it, but let's start with going 3-to-1 all the way. Let's just see what happens. And what I'm going to do is just make sure it's powered up. Obviously you don't have to change the gear on it, so you just put it like that. Now the reason I've put it all the way to the end is what I like to do is max it out, see what's happening, see what my RPS is, see how it flies, and if it's good, then great. If it's not good, if it's awful, then you can literally take this thing, flip it around, and see if that's better. Or you can leave it in the same direction and start to decrease this value. Now, like I said, I've gone 3-to-1 just to see what happens. Adding the weight did make us not want to take off. And also we have two rotors, which is probably less uplift than a 4 or 6 or whatever. But let's just see what we kind of get. So watching my RPS here. So we do hit that 20, but look at us. Now we've taken off. So literally just by adding that gear, it's given us the ability to fly. So I don't like how it's redlining, but that is something that you can now fix with microcontrollers that will control the RPS, or you can also adjust the throttle, because remember, we maxed out our throttle. I put this fully to 1. I'm just going to go ahead and paint this so it's not glaring when I spawn it. And we're going to make our way here. Now, you have a couple of options to tune this thing when it's in the air. I'm going to talk about the simple ones first. So obviously you can see that it's wanting to go up. The RPSs are jumping like crazy. Now if I press 2, I can lower my throttle manually. except there will come a point when it will want to crash. And rather than going in the upward direction, it's just going to start dropping the RPS like crazy, and eventually it will come crashing down. So there's a balance. If you have no problem with it kind of jumping at the red line, you could leave it like this. You could see around 55% we're still doing that. Now the easiest thing to do is hold Alt and press the down arrow. You're setting your trim. You're preventing this thing from moving. Now I could press D and I could press right to prevent it from kind of spinning around in place. You can see now it's still going up a little bit, so I can hold Alt and press down again. Now it's kind of spinning to the right, so I can press left. Maybe we need that 0.2. Okay, pretty stable. So now we're hovering. And this is pretty good for a basic helicopter. Again, this is kind of how I used to fine tune it. And all you do is hold Alt and set it. Now, keep in mind, these values, when you despawn your creation, it'll go away. So what we can do is take note of this. So it's 0.4, 0, 0.2, negative 0.5. You jump to your seat and set those parameters down here. So 0.2, 0, 0. I forgot what the second one was. I think it was 2, and then negative 0.5. So you can manually do that, and whenever you spawn that in, it will be constantly there. It's always going to stay there. If you hold Alt, those values are permanent. I mean, you can change them here, but whenever you spawn the creation in, they will remain as part of the helicopter. So if you want a basic, you got it. There's not even a single heavy microcontroller. It's able to fly, take off, do all that good stuff. Yes, it's redlining, but more or less with this setup now, we're kind of stable. Like I said, we can go up to that 55 or 0.55 throttle, and we're able to fly. Okay, so take a look at that. We're going forward, back, going left, right. Now I'd recommend that exhaust is aimed backwards, just so it doesn't end up flying in your face as you're flying. But there you have it. So that is a basic helicopter. Now what I will do in the next video, in the second part of this, is talk about how to polish this up, make it more functional, altitude holds, and make it just more stable and better, and not using this Alt system. Because by using Alt, or Alt, however you pronounce it, if you change the weight, then these parameters may not work anymore. What I'm saying is, if you add people here, you know, you'd put seats and whatnot, you'd add people, well, that will adjust the weight of the helicopter, and it may start to spin, start to act worse. Yes, you'll want to put lights. Yes, you'll want to put a bunch of different things. I'm not going to go through in this video, because that's, in my opinion, just personal preference and detailing, styling, whatever you want to call it. But obviously spotlights, obviously a gas gauge, you know, that sort of stuff is a no-brainer to make your helicopter functional for what you're trying to have it do. But you can see, we're quite stable. We're not really spinning around, not really doing anything weird. This is your basic helicopter. So thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, more tutorials, more builds, a lot of other stuff. Stay tuned for creations. I'm going to be releasing some other stuff. A big thank you to my Discord boosters and to my YouTube members for the extra support, and to each and every one of you for the support. And as always, happy Stormworksing. I'll see you in part 2, where we talk about more advanced helicopter controls. You can see how it kind of shakes when doing certain things. That shaking is because the RPS are too high. So we're going to worry about fixing that in the next video. Until next time, happy Stormworksing.